It was a quiet, lonely night in a small, deserted town. The air was still, and the streets were empty. A middle-aged man, Ethan, sat by his window, lost in thought. The only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves outside.
Suddenly, a bright light streaked across the sky. It was a fireball, blazing a trail through the stars. Ethan's eyes widened as he watched it hurtle towards the earth, growing larger and more intense. With a thunderous roar, it struck a spot in the nearby woods, causing the ground to tremble. At the point of impact, a glowing energy ball formed, crackling with electric energy. Thunder rumbled ominously in the background. Ethan watched in awe and fear as the energy ball pulsated and expanded. With a blinding flash, the energy ball dissipated, leaving behind a bald-headed man dressed in a flowing black robe. His expression was calm and determined, as if he had a purpose to fulfill. The bald-headed man surveyed his surroundings with piercing eyes, then turned and walked away from the impact site, his black robe billowing behind him. Ethan stepped back from the window, his heart pounding. He glanced around his quiet home, the enormity of what he had just witnessed slowly sinking in. Inside a dimly lit church hall, a group of stern-faced priests sat around a large round table. The atmosphere was tense. At one end of the table sat the three accused priests, Father Francis, Father Christopher, and Father Ndulu. Their faces were resolute, though shadows of fear flickered in their eyes. Father Francis, a man in his late 40s with graying hair and piercing eyes, stood up. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each priest. "Brothers, I understand your skepticism and fear, but I must speak the truth. What I have seen, what I know, is not heresy. It is a warning. Last night, a sign appeared, a fireball from the heavens, heralding the arrival of a great power, a power that threatens our very existence." Murmurs and whispers filled the room. Father Christopher added, "The signs are all around us. Earthquakes, storms, the sky itself changing. These are not mere coincidences. We are witnessing the beginning of the end." Father Ndulu continued, "And this power, this being that has arrived, it is beyond anything we have ever faced. We must confront it, understand it, and, if necessary, fight it." Father Benedict, an elderly man with a stern demeanor, slammed his hand on the table, silencing the room. "Enough. These are dangerous words, brothers. You speak of things that could cause panic, could destroy the faith of our followers. You have been accused of heresy because you spread fear, not hope." Father Francis pleaded, "Father Benedict, it is not fear we spread, but caution. The Church has always been the guardian against darkness. We have the power to confront this evil, but we must act before it grows beyond our control." Father Matteo, a younger priest, leaned forward with curiosity and concern. "What exactly do you propose we do, Father Francis? If this power is as great as you say, how can we possibly stand against it?" Father Francis replied, "We must unite. We must gather our strongest, our most faithful. We need to understand this power, its origins, and its weaknesses. And we must prepare our congregation, not with fear, but with the truth. Only then can we hope to protect them and ourselves." Father Benedict rose slowly, his eyes fixed on the three accused priests. "You speak with conviction, Father Francis, but conviction alone does not make truth. You are all suspended from your duties until further notice. We will investigate your claims, but I warn you, do not spread this panic among our flock. Father Francis, Father Christopher, and Father Endelu exchanged determined glances. Father Francis said, "We will abide by your decision, Father Benedict. But remember, the end is near, and we must be ready."
Anna, a 22-year-old college girl with a rebellious spirit, danced wildly to loud metallic rock music. The volume was cranked up high, shaking the walls and windows. Anna's face was a mix of joy and abandon as she lost herself in the music, her hair whipping around her face. Her room has various posters of rock stars. Her mother, Mrs. Henderson, burst into the room, her expression stern. She strode over to the stereo and switched off the music. "Anna, for goodness sake, it's late and you're disturbing the entire neighborhood." Anna rolled her eyes and collapsed onto her bed, annoyed. "Mom, it's just music. Lighten up." Mrs. Henderson crossed her arms, her face softening slightly. "It's not just the music, Anna. It's everything. You need to be more considerate. Now get some sleep." Anna muttered, "Yeah, whatever." Mrs. Henderson left the room, closing the door behind her. Anna sighed and walked over to the window, looking out into the quiet night. Standing on the road below was the bald-headed occultist leader, holding the leashes of two large, black, devilish-looking dogs. The dogs had glowing red eyes and an aura of menace about them. Anna gasped, her heart pounding. She quickly closed the window and drew the curtains. The occultist leader stood still for a moment, his eyes fixed on Anna's window. Then, with a slight nod, he turned and walked away, the dogs following obediently by his side. Anna backed away from the window, her breathing rapid. She sat on her bed, hugging her knees, the image of the occultist leader and his dogs etched in her mind. Inside the Henderson household, Mrs. Henderson paced the living room, clearly agitated. Mr. Henderson was sitting in an armchair, reading a newspaper. "I just don't know what to do with her anymore. She's completely out of control," Mrs. Henderson said. Mr. Henderson lowered his newspaper and looked up at his wife, his expression calm and dismissive. "She's just being a teenager, Susan. It's a phase. She'll grow out of it." "It's not just a phase, John. She's blasting that awful music all night, she's being disrespectful, and tonight, she was practically shaking the whole house with her dancing," Mrs. Henderson argued. Mr. Henderson brushed it off. "Let her have her fun. She's young. We did plenty of wild things when we were her age. It's different now. There's something off about her lately. And tonight, when I went to turn off her music, she was so defiant. I'm worried about her, John," Mrs. Henderson insisted. Mr. Henderson sighed and stood up, wrapping an arm around his wife. "Susan, you're overreacting. Anna's fine. She's just testing her boundaries. It's normal." Mrs. Henderson reluctantly nodded. "All right, but if this continues, we need to do something."
That same night, Ethan was in his room, trying to distract himself from the unsettling events of the past days. The room was dimly lit, casting long shadows across the furniture. His hands trembled slightly as he turned a page in his book. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Ethan jumped, his heart racing. He took hesitant steps towards the door, his breathing quickening. He took a deep breath and opened the door slowly. Standing in the doorway was the bald-headed occultist leader, flanked by his two menacing, devilish-looking dogs. Ethan froze in fear, his eyes widening in shock. "You are the chosen one, Ethan. The perfect sacrifice," the occultist leader said, his cold eyes piercing into Ethan's soul. Ethan stumbled back, unable to find his voice as fear gripped his entire being. The occultist leader strode into the living room with a purposeful gait, the dogs following closely behind him. Ethan tried to back away, but his legs felt like lead. The dogs growled menacingly, their red eyes fixed on Ethan. The occultist leader reached out and touched Ethan's forehead with a cold, gnarled hand. Ethan's eyes rolled back as he lost consciousness and collapsed to the floor, his vision blurring as darkness overtook him. A moment later, there was another knock on the door. Greg, Ethan's friend, entered the room with concern etched on his face. He rushed over to Ethan's side and knelt down beside him. Ethan, wake up. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, confusion and terror still evident in his gaze. Greg helped Ethan sit up, looking around the room frantically. What happened, man? Are you okay? Ethan trembled as he recounted the encounter. He was here, Greg. The occultist, with those dogs. He touched me. Greg frowned, trying to understand. What are you talking about? Who touched you? It was him. He said I was the chosen one, the perfect sacrifice, Ethan said, gripping Greg's arm in fear. Greg's expression darkened as he listened to Ethan's terrified account of what transpired.
The following morning, the sun cast a gentle light over the small town, bringing a semblance of normalcy to the unsettling events of the previous night. Anna, still shaken from her encounter with the occultist leader, decided to meet her friends at the local cafe. She needed to talk to someone about what she had seen. At the cafe, Anna found her friends, Sarah and Mike, already seated at their usual table. They greeted her warmly, but their smiles faded when they saw the worry etched on her face. Anna, what's wrong? Sarah asked, concerned. Anna took a deep breath and recounted the events of the previous night, including the strange man and his dogs. Sarah and Mike listened intently, their expressions growing more serious with each detail. That sounds terrifying, Mike said. Are you sure you weren't just seeing things? Anna shook her head. No, Mike, it was real. I felt it. There's something wrong going on in this town. Sarah leaned in closer. Have you told your parents? Anna sighed. I tried, but they think I'm just being dramatic. They don't understand. Mike nodded. Maybe we should do some research, see if we can find out anything about this guy or those dogs. Anna agreed, grateful for her friend's support. Yeah, let's do that. We need to find out what we're dealing with. Back at the church, Father Francis, Father Christopher, and Father Njuyu had gathered in a secluded room, away from the prying eyes of the other priests. They were determined to find out more about the ominous power they had sensed. Father Francis spread out several ancient texts and manuscripts on the table. We need to look for any references to what we saw last night, any mention of a bald-headed man, energy balls, or anything similar. Father Christopher nodded and picked up a book. I'll start with the prophecies of Saint Malachi. Maybe there's something in there. Father Njuyu, scanning through another book, added, and I'll check the writings of Nostradamus. He mentioned many cryptic events that could be related. The three priests worked diligently, poring over the texts, searching for any clue or hint that might explain the events unfolding around them. That night, Ethan lay in his bed, unable to sleep. The encounter with the occultist leader haunted him, and the fear of another visit kept him on edge. His room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of his bedside lamp. Suddenly, he heard a faint whispering sound. Ethan sat up, his heart pounding. The whispering grew louder, filling the room with an eerie presence. Ethan strained to understand the words, but they were in a language he did not recognize. The temperature in the room dropped, and Ethan could see his breath in the air. He felt a cold, clammy hand on his shoulder, and turned to see the occultist leader standing beside his bed, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. You cannot escape your fate, Ethan, the occultist leader said in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The end is near, and you will be the key to our victory. Ethan tried to move, but his body was paralyzed with fear. The occultist leader reached out and placed a small, black stone on Ethan's chest. This will mark you as ours, he said. The stone glowed with an eerie light, and Ethan felt a searing pain in his chest. He cried out, but no sound escaped his lips. The pain intensified, spreading through his body like wildfire. Suddenly, the room was filled with a blinding light. Ethan blinked, and the occultist leader was gone. The black stone lay on the floor beside his bed, its glow fading. Ethan collapsed back onto his bed, gasping for breath. The next day, Greg visited Ethan again. He found him pale and shaken, his eyes haunted by the previous night's events. Ethan, you look terrible. What happened? Ethan pointed to the black stone on his bedside table. He came again, the occultist. He left that. Greg picked up the stone, examining it closely. What is this? I don't know, Ethan replied, his voice trembling. "But it feels evil. We need to find out what it means." Greg nodded, his face set with determination. "Let's take it to Father Francis. He might know something about it." Ethan agreed, and the two friends set off for the church, the black stone wrapped in a cloth and tucked safely into Greg's bag. They needed answers, and they hoped Father Francis could provide them. At the church, Father Francis and the other priests had made some progress in their research. They had found references to an ancient cult that worshipped a powerful, malevolent being known as the Harbinger. The descriptions matched the bald-headed man and his devilish dogs. As Ethan and Greg entered the church, Father Francis looked up from his books. "Ethan, Greg, what brings you here?" Ethan placed the wrapped stone on the table. "Father, we need your help. The occultist left this in my room last night." Father Francis unwrapped the stone and examined it closely. His expression grew grim. "This is a marker, a sign that you have been chosen by the Harbinger. This is very serious." Greg asked, "What does it mean? What do we do?" Father Francis took a deep breath. "We must prepare. The Harbinger is a being of great power and evil. We need to gather our strength and find a way to protect Ethan, and we need to warn the others." Father Christopher and Father Juliu nodded in agreement. "We'll help in any way we can," Father Christopher said. Father Francis looked at Ethan, his expression resolute. "Stay close to the church, Ethan. We'll do everything in our power to keep you safe."
Later that night, the town was shrouded in darkness as the occult leader and his congregation gathered in a temple-like building. The moonlight barely penetrated the heavy clouds, casting eerie shadows over the ancient structure. Inside, the occult leader and his followers, all dressed in hooded robes, began to hum in unison, performing their rituals with a chilling precision. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, and the flickering candlelight cast an otherworldly glow on their faces. Meanwhile, Ethan was running through the streets, panting with fear. His footsteps echoed in the empty night as he made his way to the temple. He knew what awaited him, yet he felt an irresistible pull towards his fate. Ethan reached the heavy wooden doors of the temple and hesitated for a moment, gathering his courage. He pushed the doors open and stumbled inside, falling to the cold, stone floor. The congregation turned to look at him, their expressions unreadable under their hoods. The occult leader stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Welcome, Ethan. You are right on time," he said, his voice resonating through the chamber. The followers moved swiftly, lifting Ethan and carrying him to the altar. He struggled weakly, but it was futile against their strength. They placed him on the cold, hard surface, and the bald-headed man began to walk around him, chanting in a foreign language. The words were harsh and guttural, sending shivers down Ethan's spine. As the chanting reached its climax, the occult leader raised a ceremonial dagger, its blade glinting ominously in the candlelight. With a final, triumphant shout, he plunged the dagger into Ethan's chest. Ethan gasped, his body convulsing as the life drained from him. The leader's eyes burned with a fanatical fervor as he completed the ritual. Ethan's sacrifice was complete, and the congregation hummed a haunting melody, their voices blending into a chilling harmony. The bald-headed man raised his hands, signaling the congregation. "Copulation time," he declared, his voice echoing through the temple. A seductive, mild song began to play in the background, its rhythm slow and hypnotic. From the inner chamber, Anna emerged, dressed in a white, transparent long gown that billowed around her as she walked. Her eyes were glazed, as if in a trance, and she moved gracefully towards the bald-headed man. The leader and Anna began to dance and caress each other, their movements synchronized with the haunting melody. The congregation followed suit, swaying and moving in time with the music, their faces hidden under their hoods. Meanwhile, Anna lay on her bed at home, seemingly asleep. Yet her body responded to the events transpiring in the temple. She caressed her own body, her moans of pleasure escaping her lips as she was enveloped by the sensations being projected to her. This eerie connection between her physical body and the temple ritual continued into the night, the lines between reality and the supernatural blurring in a disturbing display of control and manipulation.
Morning in the Henderson household. Mr. Henderson stood at the window, his gaze fixed on the front yard. His eyes widened in disbelief as he noticed two black, devilish-looking dogs with red eyes gleaming in the morning light. "Susan, Anna, come here. Look at this," he called, turning to his wife and daughter. Mrs. Henderson hurried to join him at the window, gasping at the sight, while Anna's face remained impassive. "Do either of you know where those dogs came from?" Mr. Henderson asked. Mrs. Henderson shook her head, clearly confused. "I have no idea. Anna?" Anna's face turned pale. "No, Dad. I don't know anything about them." Mr. Henderson frowned, his eyes still on the dogs. "This is strange. I have a meeting with the local minister today. Maybe he can help us figure this out." Mrs. Henderson gently touched his arm. "Don't forget your appointment, John. The minister said he had something troubling to discuss about Anna." Mr. Henderson nodded. "I'll ask him about the dogs, too."
Later that morning, Mr. Henderson arrived at the local church for a scheduled meeting with the local minister. The church stood tall and imposing, its spire reaching towards the heavens. Mr. Henderson parked his car and walked towards the entrance, spotting the minister coming out. "Good morning, Father," Mr. Henderson greeted, shaking the minister's hand. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson. I'm afraid we'll have to reschedule our meeting." "Something urgent has come up," the minister replied, looking troubled. "Is everything all right, Father?" Mr. Henderson asked, concerned. The minister hesitated before speaking. "I had a troubling revelation about your daughter, Anna. I need to pray and reflect on it further. Can we meet tomorrow instead?" Mr. Henderson nodded, worry etching his features. "Of course, Father. I understand." As they parted ways, Mr. Henderson drove off, his mind preoccupied with the minister's words. Meanwhile, the minister continued down a lonely road, deep in thought. Suddenly, his car sputtered and came to a stop. He got out and opened the hood, trying to determine the problem. Out of the shadows, the two black, devilish-looking dogs emerged, their eyes glowing red with malevolence. Before the minister could react, they lunged at him, their fangs sinking into his flesh. The minister's screams echoed through the empty road, but there was no one around to hear them. Within moments, his life was brutally ended by the ferocious beasts. That afternoon, Mr. Henderson sat in the living room, reading a book. His wife entered, her face pale and stricken. "John, I just heard some terrible news," she said, her voice trembling. Mr. Henderson looked up, concerned. "What happened?" "The minister. He's dead. They found his body on the side of the road, attacked by animals," Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes filling with tears. Mr. Henderson was shocked. "But I just saw him a few hours ago." Anna, who was also in the room, laughed loudly. "I thought he was supposed to be pious. Looks like even he wasn't safe." Mrs. Henderson glared at her daughter. "Anna, that's enough. Show some respect." Anna shrugged and left the room, her laughter echoing down the hallway. Mrs. Henderson turned to her husband, her voice filled with fear. "John, something's not right. Anna's behavior, those dogs. I'm scared." Mr. Henderson nodded, his expression grim. "I'll talk to her. We need to figure out what's going on." He went to Anna's room and found her sitting on her bed, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I didn't mean to laugh. I'm just so scared," she said, her voice breaking. Mr. Henderson sat beside her and pulled her into a comforting embrace. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll get through this together." The following day, Anna's mother knelt at the altar in the church, praying fervently. The church was empty, the air thick with silence. A large crucifix stood tall above the altar, casting a solemn shadow over her. As she prayed, a strange sensation washed over her. She looked up at the crucifix and heard voices emanating from it. Her surroundings began to blur, and she felt herself being transported to another realm. In this surreal vision, she saw Anna dressed in a black robe, a crown on her head, and a short staff in her hand. Anna's eyes glowed with a malevolent light as she commanded, "You shall worship my son, and your faith will not help you." Anna's mother rebuked her immediately, her voice filled with defiance and fear. "No, I will never worship him." Suddenly, the vision faded, and she found herself back in the church, staring at the crucifix in fear. She ran out of the church, her heart pounding with terror and confusion.